All right. Well, all right. So I'm here. Hi, I'm Mark Galligan, and I am here today with Ray Ibarra and David Betway, and we're going to talk about service level management. But I thought we'd take a moment first to introduce ourselves, and then maybe talk a little bit about a group we belong to. David, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, definitely will. Thank you, Mark, for inviting me onto this today. My name's David Betway. I'm in charge of communications for the Los Angeles Local Interest Group for ITSMF. And I've got over 25 years experience in IT service management. I've worked in several companies in the defense industry, insurance industry, entertainment industry. And I've got a lot of experience with service level agreements. And so I'm looking forward to today's discussion and seeing if we can't cover some good points along this. Passions in the IT industry for me include automation. That's something that I really try and focus on. I enjoy doing that. Also service design and implementation. And I'm looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you, Mark.
All right. Ray.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ray Ibarra. I'm a president of the local interest group here for ITSMF. I'm also on the national level with ITSMF USA. I'm a director with that. And just participating, enjoying this. I'm the vice president for Mantech Solutions, and I'm excited about the topic that Mark has picked for us and we'll talk about here. And let's have a good time and have your questions ready to send to us if you'd like at any time.
All right, and then I'm Mark Galligan. I am a principal for a company called Simplicate-IT, where our goal is to make IT more simple, certainly at least to consume. And I, like both Ray and David, have been with the IT Service Management Forum for a number of years. Currently, I'm fitting in the role of secretary of the local Los Angeles chapter, and I'm currently working with a large health insurer and working on an asset management process. But today's topic was about, I thought we'd start talking about service level management because it's usually one things I've found companies want to shy away from. And it is perhaps one of the most important service management practices you can adopt because and I'll elaborate on this more later, but it allows you to set an expectation in your customer's mind as opposing to letting them set the expectation in their mind in terms of when your IT issue will be resolved or the thing you order will be procured and delivered. So with that, Ray, do you want to tell us a little bit about the IT Service Management Forum before we dive in?
Sure. It's a professional society. It's been around for about, let me think here, at least since 2001 or two, and it is a global organization. It is established to help people grow, learn, and share knowledge within the IT service management arena. It started off as a bunch of people who wanted to talk about ITIL and slowly migrated over to service management. And my interests were at the time really heavy into it. I've been working for companies like Hewlett-Packard and Ernst & Young for years and was rolled into it when I started with them, and it's an important part of everything we do in terms of service management. So, it's just kind of caught me, and I've been growing and working with it ever since. For all the members out there, we love to have more people, so we'll probably have a little ad at the end of this where you can sign up or become a member if you want more information through ITSMFUSA.org. So thank you, guys.
And I will put a link to the organization's website in the video's notes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. All right. Well, thank you both very much. So I had in our agenda here, I have kind of like we can talk about the other ITIL processes and their relationship to service level management. And I've kind of evolved on this over a period of time, and that's probably from getting several things wrong before and banging my head against the proverbial wall to try and get them to work, and eventually I didn't. So, and again, I'm not right necessarily, so if you guys think differently, please feel free to speak up. But I think there are two service delivery ITIL service delivery processes that really have service level management as a core component to them. And that would be incident management, where something's broken and it goes through a series of prioritizations, and based upon the outcome of that prioritization, you will have a target time in which to restore that service, if you will. And then with request management, I think that items that you would have in your service catalog, if in fact you do have a service catalog, would have a service level associated with the time to deliver them. And so if it takes 5 days to deliver a PC, then to a new employee, then that process is going to take 5 days, and you would kind of guarantee delivery on that. So a couple distinctions. Number one, incidents are restored. The SLA is driven by a priority scheme. So if it's a major incident, maybe it's got to be resolved in 2 hours. And if it's a lower priority incident, or I think what we would call a standard priority incident, maybe it's 3 days. And then an item ordered from a service catalog, or a service ordered from a service catalog, would be the SLA would be based upon the time it takes to deliver that particular item or service. I don't think changes would have an SLA, right? Changes have a target deployment date, but not necessarily an SLA. And then I don't think problems would necessarily have an SLA associated with them either. And then the other thing is on the request management, and I always forget this one, is there are kind of generic requests where somebody may ask you to fulfill something that you don't necessarily typically offer or have a workflow or procedure in which to deliver it. I don't think those have SLAs. I think that's all delivered best effort. Gentlemen, what do you think?
I think you're spot on there, Mark. Those are two key ITIL processes that are often wrapped within SLAs in whether you are, as a company, you are outsourcing your services, or if you're just tracking how well you perform internally. Very common SLAs there. I think we also see them in availability management. If you're into infrastructure and operations, uptime is frequently a metric that will find its way onto your desk.
All right.
But I agree.
That is a great point, David. Right.
And excuse me, I don't disagree with anything you said. I think those are key and very important. But there's some companies that I've worked with or had the pleasure of working with where they will put an SLA on everything. You know, I know in some situations, I mean, it feels like you're in a stranglehold. You know, and in terms of, I mean, you can get to a point where this was a true story at one of the companies I went to help simplify everything they were doing. They started off with 3 colors: red, yellow, and green, right? In terms of what the priority should be. And by the time they had been working with this other consulting company, they had it multiple colors. I mean, like probably 20 different shades of every color. And it just makes it too complex. You know, what you want to do is use a little bit of common sense, figure out what the right SLA is, and work to that as best to your capabilities. But where you get into trouble is where you get some executives that have, especially in larger companies, where they're directors on top of directors that are trying to negotiate perpetually. In other words, yeah, we have an SLA, but this is a circumstance that needs, you know, higher level of attention and more people on this, et cetera, et cetera. And those are where you get caught up and things will just fail at that point, because now you're circumventing your own best, you know, guesses in terms of what an SLA should be and how it should be worked. But just, you know, just another thread in this thing to give you some different perspective.
Great point. And I think there he is. Okay. Do you? I think we've all experienced that as well, Ray. Do you find, or well, let me say it this way: do you think that that the SLA target, or the target percentage of SLA attainment, should be 100%?
That's a very good question, right? I think there are some specific instances where it's important, and those are probably the minority of what we're talking about here. Maybe 1 to 5% max should be that way. Other than that, there has to be some leeway in there so that the wiggle room is to allow you to run your business like a business, you know, because you're not a machine. and you got human beings involved, and those human beings are going to make a mistake, slip on something, and do that. And without that flexibility, you got everybody written up every week, and it's not going to help and not going to make it work.
Right.
Yeah, I 100% agree that not 100% is the is a more realistic target for many SLAs.
Yep.
It just, obviously no wiggle room with 100%,
Well, right. Well, the other thing too is that assumes that you have control of everything in terms of an incident, resolving the incident or the delivery of an item. Either way, and I don't think you do. The approach that I have found that has worked best, and it's worked best with the 4 large companies that I've worked for, has been for end user type incidents. So priority, if you use a scale of 5, which seems to be kind of at least universally adopted, anything that would be a priority 3, 4, or 5 would have different resolution times. I think a priority 5 would be 5 days, a priority 4 would be 3 days, and a priority 3 would be 1 day. And our SLA with our business is that we would meet those 80% of the time. And if we were doing that, we would consider that achieved. For the higher priority incidents, they had resolution times measured in hours, and it would go across weekends and after business hours as well. So it was a 24/7 SLA, if that makes sense. And we would do priority 1, we had to have resolved in 3 hours, and priority 2, we had to resolved in 5 hours. And we'd have to attain those performance levels 90% of the time. But one of the things we would do track is, because it is an agreement between us as the service provider and our customers, if you will, or our employee base as the consumers of these services, both of us have to participate in that SLA. And so we would set up in our incident response and our service catalog deliveries, we would have states that would reflect where the ownership of the incident currently is. Now, in a high priority incident, that doesn't really change much. As a matter of fact, usually it's the incident commander, right, or the NOC that owns those. But we would set up for an incident, we would have like a pending user, right? Because hey, somebody from the desktop support team has called them, they've left them a voicemail, they haven't responded. And so we'd mark that incident as pending user because we need feedback from the user from which we can go on. And usually, in the service desk world, you'll hear, well, I called them 3 times and I've never gotten a response. Well, when the SLA timer fires, we would capture that incident state. So if it was pending, well, first off, it was with us, right? It would be, the state would be open, right, or new. And that would tell us, well, we owned the ticket when the SLA blew. A pending user would be, well, the customer owned the SLA. In some cases, we'd have pending vendor if we were dependent upon a vendor to provide we're involved in the service restoration of that. And then in some cases, pending change, maybe the thing necessary to, although we might have we'd do the workaround, the thing to actually fix the issue and prevent the incident from occurring again would be pending on a change ticket. And so we capture those states when the SLA timer blew. So when we went to go to report the business, we could tell them the whole story. And if you want, I actually have a slide deck where I kind of captured a year of that. But that made it, I think that meant that kind of told a story to the business and to us in IT that first off, we're a team working together to achieve these performance goals. And it wasn't just a number, if you will, to hang myself by to say, well, either you're doing a bad job or a good job. It was, okay, no, this is a partnership. This is what we agree to source. And we would report back on it. And when we missed the SLAs, we would take action to figure out, well, how did that happen? And what do we do to improve that performance? So, for example, you're on a major incident, right? Because those are the ones people really care about, or they care about more than, Mark's keyboard is stuck, right?
Yeah.
Key is stuck on his keyboard. Is we would call vendor support. And again, this is maybe a gross generalization, but it's definitely a generalization. When you have a high priority incident and you have a revenue producing service that's down or a key service that is down, if the team's not on it, doesn't have it kind of figured out in 15 minutes, right? It's going to get longer and longer and longer. So one of the things we would do is we would contact our key support vendors, both for software and for hardware, within 15 minutes, because it takes them time to get on a call, right? Yeah. So we would, for example, if we had a SQL database issue, we would 15 minutes into it, if one of the DBAs or the systems analysts or the application people couldn't figure it out, in the background we were calling Microsoft, because it takes them an hour to get on the call. And if you don't want to be into something 3.5 hours, right? Your SLA is blown, and then you're calling the vendor. Oh, well, now I got to wait 4, right? So that was some examples of how we would track those things. I don't know if that made any sense in the context of this, but guys, do you have experience with that, or doing something similar or something different?
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I've got experience with managing response times for different priority level incidents, and we would typically structure things very much along the lines of what you were laying out, with P4s being the 5-day completion, and P1s getting minutes of SLAs measured in minutes as far as things. A lot of times you might see the service level agreement broken out into a response time, where there's a communication point or some kind of acknowledgement right away, right up front, measurements of that, and then overall resolution time for standard incidents might be the stuff that's several days or whatever, whether you're measuring on 24 hours a day or some kind of business clock, whatever, however those things go. Those are typical SLAs, and I think the goal of these SLAs really should be to drive the behavior that you want. I think that's the main purpose of them. And so having a good thinking exercise before you map out your SLAs and stuff is a good practice, to say, okay, what are we going to try and drive here? What would we like to see? What would we sit back and call success at the end of all this? And then use that to help you formulate what you are going to measure against. So, yeah.
So it's interesting when you're working with software, for example. Mark, when we were talking before we started this tape, you're talking about you work for a company that a lot of batch systems, and you're working with batch callouts. I was working in a similar situation where we were working with a good company, a good partner of ours in India, that was handling all of our batch programs for Y2K. And they needed this stuff done. It needed to be done timely. If there was an event or something broke out there, how quickly we could react to this thing was critical to us. And when you're working with an international company that's in a different time zone, et cetera, it just adds another layer of complexity to what you're doing to get this stuff done. And even if we were working with a U.S. company, to your point, you're bringing in people that don't work for your company. They got a different set of priorities. And having worked for a company like Hewlett-Packard, where there was a problem with one of our customers, there's a priority list. Who gets done first, who gets done second, who gets done third, and then we have to make sure. But at the end of that, there was still a time sink. If it's this type of problem, the red, the yellow, the green, these problems here, we got to make sure that they're addressed first. I don't care if they're a tiny company or a huge aircraft company. They have to be done first, and you work it that way, and you work to a time frame. Right? I remember being told it's 7 o'clock. What are you still doing here? And I said, I'm working on a red. Right? And they just left me alone and said, should I bring you dinner? Right? But it's having that sense of urgency to get things done for the customer. And you're working with, typically, not by myself, working with 2 other people, somebody who can read dumps, somebody can do this to make sure this thing gets up and running. We're dealing with a payroll issue at one of the largest aircraft companies in the world. we need to get this fixed. We know it's something on our software. Let's figure out what it is, and we get people in to try to do that. But it's knowing who those right people are to pull into the team to get this done. It's not going to be me and Superman, because Superman doesn't exist. And besides that, he's not a very good Cobalt developer. So you got to get that kind of stuff in there. But when you're working with SLAs, they may be hard and true SLAs, or they may be just SLAs that are created to assure you don't put anybody in trouble. Bottom line, right? So if you're working with a manufacturing issue that's got the line shut down at a XYZ mom and pop manufacturing company, that's just as critical as an aircraft can't get out the back door at Lockheed or Boeing or whoever we were working with at the time. And it's just understanding those so that your partner, because if you're working with a partner or your other departments you're working with, understand what the impact of not having this thing functional or working at that point in time. Bottom line, period.
Right. Yep. Have you guys experienced this when you start communicating back your performance, your SLA performance towards SLAs?
Right.
Because first off, when you haven't done it, sometimes those meetings could be a little contentious because everybody kind of has in their head what they should be as opposed to what you've got agreed, right? But you go down the process and you got them kind of set up, and you have your first meeting and then your second meeting, your third meeting. And you kind of start to explain, well, this is what's going on. This is our overall performance. It's been my experience that is a great way to kind of, if you will, put some water on the heat, right? Because then what happens is the leadership of the organization you provide the service to starts to get an understanding, number one, of, well, first off, what the volume of demand that they're putting on your organization, right, in terms of incidents and changes and problems and requests and that sort of thing, and then that you do respond to them well, and it's no longer driven by the exception, right? Because and that goes a long way. So sometimes, usually by the third meeting, they've got a really good understanding of the total performance of the organization. Whereas before, it might have been one individual say, well, I gave my ticket to Mark and he hasn't done anything about it, right? Or those guys in IT, I gave them a ticket and, it's been weeks, right? And maybe it has been weeks, but not all tickets have been weeks, right?
Exactly.
Right. And when you can have that meeting with your constituent, right, or the people who you provide service for, it really goes a long way to, dare I say, depoliticize a lot of service issues and gets them to a point where I think they can start to trust you a little bit more to perform your service, right? You start to develop a better working relationship, I guess, with your constituents.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think one of the key things in there is you need a process, for problem solving, right?
Yeah.
And I remember getting trained years ago on Kepner-Trago, which is a problem solving tool, that works and it does what it needs to do. But what I always like to look back on is this situation reminds me of another situation I was in, and try to bring back from that and how I solve that problem. But to write things down, I think, is critical, and understand what that means. Where the thing's going to get clogged. Where are the blocking points on this? Once we know what we got to do. The longest, an old term that was used probably a million times in my career is, what's the longest pole in the tent to get this thing solved, right? And it sometimes it's you need to get a part in to get this thing fixed so we can get this thing going again. Sometimes it's because when you talk about software issues, it's not always the software, it's the hardware or the firmware that's embedded within that complex problem that you're dealing with. And it's not just visible. There's not a red light that's going to go on and say, here's the problem, look at me, okay, let's just fix that. No, it's going to be, you got to, maybe you wrote some special code on top of this that should work as worked before, but it's not working today. Why? And you have to go through that problem solving to break it down. who all is involved and who is a long pole in the tent, and understanding those factors to give to the customer, that end customer, so they know I understand the problem, I can see the problem, I know what I'm working to get around the problem. And you're right, we had agreed on an SLA of 3 hours on this, but we're in our 6th hour and clearly we don't have a solution yet, right? So back off, let us work this problem, unless you want to roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty, right?
Yeah.
And they'll usually just back off at that point. But it's having the ability to have those hard discussions with people when you're in a situation that clearly I'm not going to make my SLA. That's bad. We understand that.
Yeah.
Let's not make it worse by starting a bunch of other fires to confuse that fire, right? That's not going to make anybody any better or any smarter or get the problem solved. Let's deal with the problem at hand and don't get defocused. And people appreciate that and like that.
Yeah, I think so. I think the service level management process and establishing service level agreements is going to be a growing it's going to be a growing exercise for the organization, for providers, for the customers. Everybody is going to learn more at the end of it, and they'll realize that at the end of it, because as you were saying, Mark, you sit down in those first meetings and you lay out how we did in the last month or whatever, and people see red, and nobody likes to see red, and they're going to be saying, well, this was the reason, and this, and I counted these this way. And what you find is that the service and the things that are measured and the definition of specific things starts bubbling up, and then it gets where there are disagreements, those get scrubbed out, those get polished and agreed upon. And so after a few cycles and iterations, you find you are all speaking more of a common language with what uptime is, what downtime is, what exceptions are, what exceptions aren't. Your whole service is better defined for it, and people understand it better. I think that's one of the real benefits of it. And along those lines, I think one of the things that's very important to do when building service level agreements is to keep it simple. Keep it as simple as possible, because you want to spend your time and energy delivering the service, not measuring how well you're delivering the service. And I think that to the extent possible that you can leverage whatever your ITSM tool is and let it perform the service level calculations is very, very important in going about establishing SLAs and managing to them.
Okay. And just another comment on that is, when you do your report out at the end of the month, or the weekly, whatever those, management wants to report to see what this was. When you take a look at how bad this SLA was, it was horrible. We doubled it. We went 6 days instead of 3 days, right? I like to ask the question in those meetings: what was the impact of that? Did production drop? Did we do payroll? Did we miss? What did we miss? What went wrong? And then at that point, we say, do we need to adjust the SLA because we probably had too much heat on these guys to begin with? Let's soften it a little and then relook at it, because you have to. It's a give and take. It may be something else where we were shut down for 4 days. We didn't get payroll out. We had some issues with people threatening to sue us at work for us. Blah blah blah. Sure. Those now we have to tighten that SLA, or maybe simplify the number of fingers that are in that problem that was in there. Well, we got 2 sub vendors that are working with us. We don't need all that. Right. We were using an international group to do the programming on that. Maybe we don't need that for whatever application is the specific one that's causing the issue. Right. And you have to bring in common sense and clear heads, period.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. There's always, some exceptions. I always remember like database processing, right? Inevitably, I don't know if you guys have been in this. I would be shocked if you hadn't. But somebody's running some sort of SQL query that's updating some sort of records, and it's doing a bad update, and so they cancel it, and so the database starts backing it out, right? And so if you were 4 hours into that process, right, it's going to be 4 hours to get out of it, and there's just nothing. you can do about that sort of thing. So, let me ask this, and not to be too controversial here, but what do you guys think about stopping the clock? I've been in a lot of organizations where they'll, and for what it's worth, I am not a stop the clock person. I think it's a measurement of time. There's a you document the time it begins, you document the time it was either resolved or delivered, and it's just time is linear. It's not stopped. But there's a lot of organizations that want to stop the clock, frankly, to make it look like they're making the SLA. Right. Now, what do you guys think about that? Is that a good practice, a bad practice?
I think it's a horrible practice. I think, it's better to deal with the reality of the issue and understand that, hey, you know what, this one just got away from us. We didn't think through it clearly enough because we were panicking. Whatever the excuse is for missing that SLA. But to stop the clock, in my opinion, is defeating it. Then I think you need to sit down and then readjust that SLA. Let's figure it out, because this is clearly going to be a bigger problem. We're working with 3 international companies here, blah, 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 whatever the issue is. There's only one programmer in the whole world that knows how to do this, because as I've been saying for the last 10 years, we need to, sunset this piece of software, right? I've been in those situations where we've had, at a customer site where they had something that was written, believe it or not, by the original owner. And he is not a developer, but it's still working, and they're having those problems. And, it's just scary, because if he dies, this thing is going away. Let's break down and buy something COTS off the shelf and put it in and sunset this thing for God's sake. But people have their pride. They want to make sure this stuff works. It's worked for 50 years. Why won't it work in the next 50, right? So it's just understanding, and I'm, to your point, just a firm believer in you don't stop the clock. It's running, and let's just bite the bullet. You know what I mean? The baby's ugly. Let's just admit that.
Yeah,
David,
I think that no answer is going to be the right answer 100% of the time. But in general, I would tend to lean to not stopping the clock and lowering the target number and just meet it on total time. Don't put the holds and exceptions in if it's, if you're trying to hit 95% or some measure and you want to put things on hold to be able to get there, and really, 85% is a realistic number based on running time. If we're talking about, percentages of things, or in total time, hours, days, whatever you're using, I would say let the clock run, because that's just one more thing you're tracking, one more thing you're doing that isn't delivering the service. Stopping the clock, starting the clock again, doing the math to calculate what is the real performance on this particular instance. And again, like I said, keeping it simple, you want to keep it as simple as possible. And everything that you do to that to make it, to polish it, and it really does. It adds complexity. It doesn't sound like it's adding complexity, but it adds complexity at the end of the month. The total amount of time you spend managing the service level agreement, you want to try and minimize that.
I think you're spot on. I was going the same place where you went earlier. Was like, you want to keep it simple, right? And now you have to remember, okay, I stopped it. Now I got to remember to start it. Well, did they remember to start it? Now when I'm calculating the time, I have to take out this gap, and I have to do
absolutely.
I've been there, done that, more than once in my life, in my career. It's not fun, because it's usually me who forgot to restart the clock.
Well, so on a slight tangent from that question, then let's think about it this way: where you're the rather than the provider of the service, you're the consumer of the service, and somebody comes to you and say, "Look, I've made my SLA 100% of the time." Do you believe them?
It may be true for a period of time, but it won't last forever. How long have you been doing this SLA? If they say 10 years, then I'll say maybe it's time to readdress that SLA and make it a little more aggressive. Maybe, right? Because you need that. You need to have something that's pushing you to keep on top of this stuff. And but from my perspective, I believe it, but maybe we just need to look at it right, left, and on top and on bottom, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I believe they believe it, but I think, when you do dig in, you're going to find that there are reasons why maybe what that SLA is that they're hitting 100% of the time has kind of disconnected or deviated from what's really value to the organization.
Right.
And they're now achieving something that really doesn't add anything to the overall IT service or what the company is in business to produce. Sure. And it's a measure for a measure to keep it 100%, and it's a pretty cool record to have going. Needs to be looked at. It's not out of the question, but it's, people are human, and humans don't do everything at 100%.
Right. Or it's so easy to achieve, right?
Yes.
Maybe it's kind of like a sandbag.
Could be.
Well, and typically within this there's a channel there that you're looking at, the process chain. And if something breaks here all the time, and they say, well, I've covered. I called them back within 3 days. It's the other guys that didn't do it. So my SLA is still at 100%. No, if you're part of that food chain, which is one of the subsets, you're all part and parcel of it. We have to change that to make sure that if you don't get this from him, then you're in trouble anyway, right? Or it's your bad.
Well, right. And in a financial services company, they're going to ask, well, this is what it cost. You're doing it. You hit it 100% of the time. Okay. How much could you lower your costs if you only did it 85% of the time?
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Because
really good.
That might be good enough, right? And
a lot of times, Mark, the cost to get the last 2% to 100% are the marginal costs are incremental. It doesn't, you're not buying anything. You're not getting the value for the money you spend on the last 2 or 5% or whatever.
So that price just goes up
95 might be just good enough. Yeah.
Right. You reach the point of there's a point of diminishing
return.
Right.
Yes.
All right. Great. Well, I think that was a great conversation.
That was a great question.
Yeah. So I think we kind of talked about why service levels are important, but just in case, again, it lets you define what the expectation is, or work with your constituents to define what the expectation is, so we all know what good looks like, as opposed to people to make it up in their own head. Because when it's not defined, that's what people do, right? I think that's pretty good. And then, so let's talk about maybe inside of IT or outside of IT, your most interesting service level experience.
Oh, I saw you put that out there, Mark, and that's I'm trying to get. The one that comes to mind is an old company that I was working for, and the service desk was trying to minimize the amount of time they were. No, it was ticket resolution within 1 day. And what they were doing was they would intake the call and stop the clock right after the phone call ended. And because of some whatever reason, the clock was stopped, and the clock they would go, they'd work on the problem, they'd get the customer back up and running, they resolve the incident, they'd start the clock, close the ticket, and we're hitting 90 something percent, and it just was it wasn't transparent, and it wasn't the point of the exercise. And sometimes you come across things like that.
Yeah. Ray?
I've got a lot of stories, right?
Yeah.
In terms of that, because
it doesn't have to be IT.
Oh, no, I understand that. And because I spent a lot of time just working in manufacturing too, right? But it's all in my estimation, one of the big things I did while I was in IT and doing this for IT was process improvement, right across the board, process re-engineering, basically, because somebody told me, 100 years ago that you need to simplify everything you're doing before you try to automate it. And the reason for that is it's, garbage in, garbage out. If you got too many, checkpoints in what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. I'm just a firm believer in looking at things from a real simplistic perspective and simplifying it. Everything should be simplified before you actually try to do it. Get it done with as few hands touching it as possible, and get it done in as short a time frame as possible, but be realistic about what you're doing. And ask the question, if we don't have this step in here, will anybody die? right? Because sometimes you'll have over control in terms of what you're doing, and that's not any good either. But with most of the companies I find, when I would go in and try to help them, they wouldn't be across the board everything was awful. There'd be given departments or given processes that needed to be looked at, and once you
Yeah.
find that, then you can zero in on it and quit trying to fix the whole food chain. Let's fix what's broken, and sometimes it's not even broken. It's just off the railroad tracks a little bit. Let's put it back on the tracks and get it running. But teach everybody why it got off the tracks, what you need to do to keep it on the tracks to get to that end result, which is a smooth running business process, period.
I had started as I was a senior director of end user services in a large Fortune 300 company here in the States, and things were bad, right? They don't bring in new management because things are going well. Right.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's they usually tell us, okay, things aren't going quite as they had expected. And I remember one time I was just new on the job, and I had this one vice president of one of the business units, the for-profit business units, people who actually do the job of the company. And he sat me down, and we were talking through some things. He says, really, at the end of the day, I don't care whether you deliver the computer in 2 weeks or 2 days. Pick one, right? Just be consistent and reliable in terms of how you can deliver it. And it was really that was a particularly insightful conversation, because that the person who was delivering it in 2 days was really busting their ass to get that computer to this department, and it wasn't helping. Right. That's what he was saying. Is saying, well, hey, look, I need you to be consistent. If we order a new computer, maybe for a new employee, we need the computer in 7 days. Get it to us in 7 days. Okay, great. And that's what we'll do. So that was the beginning of an interesting journey. So
good stuff.
Yeah. Well. All right. I think we kind of talked about delivery processes all have service level management. So where would you start? If you were going to start, you're sitting there saying, I'm in an organization kind of like now, right? And I kind of like where I am right now. We don't have service levels, and they're kind of afraid of them. How would you start that conversation with the team?
I think it's a good question. I think you might want to look at your ITSM tool and look at what capabilities that tool provides natively, right out of the box, and ask yourself, are these good things for us to measure? Would we get benefit by measuring it? It's very simple. The tool does it. You don't have to configure anything. Should we start here? Should we measure this? And maybe that's a good, the answer could be yes, or it could be a launching point to finding the kind of thing you do want to measure. But I think the one thing that will facilitate and enable is going back to keeping it simple and having the tool be able to calculate and measure your service level quickly at any point in the month, let's say. You don't want to get into a place where it takes you 6 hours of processing to figure out where you are mid-month and then make adjustments based on that. You want to push a button in the morning, get a dashboard, and see exactly where you are with minimal effort. And the tools that are out there these days for ITSM are all getting very mature and capable for implementing service level agreements on many of the things that are very common, and very valuable to an organization. So I think that's a good starting point. Is look at what your tool does and let that kind of guide you if you don't have any other experience at it.
Yep, I would agree. I would agree 100% with that. And one of the things that I was taught many years ago when I first started doing ERP implementations was keep it vanilla as much as possible. Right out of the box. Only change the things you absolutely have to. Someone will die if we don't change this. And and start with one module and then work from there. Or what we used to call was mini closed loops when we're doing ERP systems. So if I'm going to put in procurement, I need to have inventory control in there at the same time. If I'm going to do that, I need to have accounts payable and receivable part of that too. So I know what's coming in, what's going out, what I'm paying for, what I'm not paying for, and I've got inventory, and I can create purchase orders, etc. So those were what we call the mini closed loops. And the same thing is true in service management. What touches this, and how is this going to work, so that you can do that same thing going forward. So you keep it simple, keep it small, and then let it grow from there. Demand will create the other modules from when they really need to be done, and just let that be the way of the world. And look for champions as you do them one at a time. You got to have somebody internally in the company that's your champion. He could be a low level, engineer, manager. You could be a director, somebody that really bleeds this stuff at the end of the day and understands it, and will be personally and passionately involved with whatever that process is going to be that you want to do. That's the way I would look for it and do it.
All right. And then Art, if I bring up a PowerPoint, because I put one together for this. So
yeah, please.
All right. So here I'm gonna just a quick. I won't go into too much because it is.
There he is. Hey, Mark.
Right.
So we wrapped up and said goodbye to everybody.
Okay. All right. So I brought up a PowerPoint with a flow chart in it that was stupidly complex, and then I got cut off. Is that what happened?
Yeah, you were gone. We didn't even get to see any of it. You just said, hold on.
Yeah, got the cut off part.
But anyway, we assume you're going to cut that section off where he and I are just talking here and talking about drinking and doing these things, and I just said no. We won't do it.
Yes. All right, so I'll bring it back up again. Hopefully, I think what happened was my hour I'd scheduled for an hour, and Microsoft.
Yeah, I think like I told you, I think it died.
Yeah, it just Microsoft did that. So again, hopefully.
All right, and I'm at the witching hour, just to let you guys know. I gotta go back. I got people who've been calling me here. If you see me leaning over touching my phone, I gotta call those folks back.
All right, so give us 5 minutes, Ray.
Yep, no problem. No problem.
All we need. All right, so all righty. So now, so here is my
go into presentation mode so you would look bigger. Oh, that little screen. There you go. Right there.
Well, again, the idea is not to go through all these charts, but this is kind of, if you will, an example, I think, of a mature IT service management delivery processes. You kind of have your request process over here, some change, incident, problem, configuration, asset management. But I brought this up basically to kind of share this line, right? Which is setting an expectation, if you will, establishing service level management, because if you don't, people are going to choose their own time. Right? How long is it going to take you to fix this problem, or to deliver this particular piece of software or piece of hardware, or set up the credentials necessary to do that? And they're completely uninvolved in any of all this other stuff that is going on, right? When you take your car to get an oil change at a dealership, right? You're completely unaware of all the stuff the dealership has to do to keep itself operating, and frankly, you don't care. You just know you want to get your oil changed. You know what oil kind you want and when you want to get it done. And what the dealer does then is they're very good about managing your expectations about when you'll be able to get your car, right? And get your service done. And in IT, I think service level management helps us get there by taking that expectation out of the requesters or the caller's hands and putting it in yours, so you can manage that expectation.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's great, Mark. That might be a good topic for the next one. Service level management of customer expectation, and building that out, because I think that's a real important view to take of your IT services.
All right. Well, I have more things to go on here, but I think we're running out of time. And I know, Ray, you got a dash. So I think we kind of talked a little bit about how to measure and how to report. I think that was earlier in the conversation, so we can kind of lean back on that. Again, thank you both for participating. I think this was actually pretty good. Certainly, it was a more robust conversation than I was expecting. So again, diminish expectations always lead to delight. If you happen to watch this presentation or this podcast, give us some feedback. Let us know whether you liked the content, whether you didn't like the content, any sort of things you think we could improve upon. And then also, of course, if there's any topics you'd like to see us cover in the future, let us know, and we'll be happy to take that under advisement. With that, gentlemen, I'm going to, you're supposed to also, if you like this, subscribe to the channel, and that would be good as well. And again, that's it. So
thank you for inviting me to join, Mark. I really appreciated it.
Thank you, Mark. Same with me.
Well, thank you both, and I'll look forward to doing more of these.
Sounds
Very
good.
good.
All right, you all have a good night.
You too. Cheers.
You as well.
Bye-bye.